He was a young Navy SEAL, brave, loyal, and unbroken. But his life changed the day he met a mysterious old veteran, once known by a name whispered in fear: Ghost 5. What began as a chance encounter soon became a mission from God, uncovering secrets buried beneath decades of lies and a legacy the world was never meant to see again. In the heart of the desert, between faith and fear, a young soldier must rise to protect not just his country, but the soul of a legend forgotten by time. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Crescent Bay slept beneath a veil of early evening fog, the kind that dulled colors and swallowed sound until only the ocean's heartbeat remained. Inside the small naval exchange near the pier, fluorescent lights hummed softly as shoppers wandered between narrow aisles. Lieutenant Ryan Carter stood near the end of one, his hand resting on the leash of Shadow, the German shepherd who had followed him through more firefights than he cared to count. The dog's amber eyes moved constantly, scanning faces, exits, the faint flicker of reflection in glass. Years of service had wired both man and dog for vigilance. They didn't relax. They calculated silence. Ryan was on medical leave, though leave was a strange word for a man who hadn't yet learned how to rest. His right shoulder still carried the ghost of shrapnel from Syria, and sometimes when the wind hit wrong, it ached like memory itself. He was there for something simple: coffee, maybe canned food, but mostly he was there because it felt close to what he missed: order, purpose, the faint echo of command voices and discipline. Down the aisle, a sound cracked through the calm, a sharp, irritated voice. "Are you going to move, old man? Or are you planning to read the label all day?" The speaker was Major Brent Wallace, tall, confident, with that polished air that came from too many ceremonies and too few battles. He was new to Crescent Bay and carried himself like the base owed him its silence. Ryan looked up in time to see an older man freeze near the soup shelf, a can trembling slightly in his hand. The veteran's posture wasn't frail, just tired. His cap bore a faded Navy emblem, the kind issued decades ago. Wallace's voice rose again, drawing attention. "This aisle isn't a museum, sir. Some of us have real duties to get back to." Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. He knew that tone too well, the one used by men who thought authority made them righteous. He took a slow breath, trying to remind himself he wasn't in command here. He wasn't supposed to intervene. But as Wallace continued, his words twisting from impatience to mockery, something in Ryan cracked. He remembered his father, a Vietnam veteran who had once been called too slow by a younger officer after decades of service. His father had laughed it off, but Ryan had seen the quiet wound it left. The old man finally looked up at Wallace. "My apologies, Major," he said softly, voice low and even. "Didn't mean to hold you up." He placed the can back with deliberate calm and turned to leave. Wallace stepped closer, blocking his path. "Maybe next time you do your shopping somewhere that matches your pace." His smirk didn't reach his eyes. Shadow's head tilted, ears flattening slightly, a low rumble stirring in his throat. Ryan laid a steadying hand on the leash, but his pulse was already pounding. "Major!" Ryan called out, his tone neutral, but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "That's enough." The aisle went still. Wallace turned, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Lieutenant Carter, is it? You're on restricted duty. I suggest you stay out of what doesn't concern you." "It concerns every man who wears this uniform," Ryan replied, stepping closer, his voice calm but iron beneath. "That man earned his right to be here same as any of us. You forget that. You forget what the Navy stands for?" A few sailors nearby stopped to watch, pretending to browse. The air grew heavy. Wallace's face hardened. "You think you can lecture me on respect, Carter? You're a field dog who doesn't know when to heel." Shadow growled softly then, a sound that made several heads turn. The veteran, clearly not wanting trouble, touched Ryan's arm lightly. "Son," he murmured, "let it go. Some lessons aren't worth the fight." But Ryan couldn't. There was something in the man's eyes, calm, unbroken, carrying decades of storms, and something in that patience infuriated Wallace all the more. "Sir," Ryan said to the old man, "you don't have to leave." Wallace snapped, "He does now. That's an order." Ryan turned, facing him fully. "Then it's an order I can't follow." The silence that followed was electric, the kind that precedes either violence or revelation. Wallace took one threatening step forward before another voice cut through the aisle. "That's enough, both of you." Colonel Michael Reeves, the base commander, had arrived, drawn by the commotion. His tone carried authority that didn't need to shout. "Major Wallace, step aside. Lieutenant Carter, leash your dog and explain." Ryan did, simply, without embellishment or excuse. Reeves listened, then looked at the older man who stood quietly at the edge of the aisle. "Sir, may I have your name?" The veteran nodded. "Thomas Hale, Colonel, retired Navy. Just shopping, sir." Reeves frowned slightly. The name stirred something faint in memory, but he couldn't place it. "Understood. You're free to go, Mr. Hale." Thomas offered a nod to Ryan before turning away, his voice quiet as tide water. "Thank you, son." Then he disappeared down the next aisle, his gait slow but steady. Reeves turned to Ryan. "Lieutenant, you're off duty. You had no authorization to confront an officer. We'll discuss this later." Ryan simply nodded. He knew what that meant. Disciplinary action, perhaps confinement to base. But in his gut, there was no regret. Watching Thomas leave, he felt something stir. Respect, maybe guilt, or something harder to name. Shadow nudged his knee gently, sensing the unrest. That night, as Ryan walked along the empty docks, the fog had thickened into a curtain of gray. He looked out over the water, where faint lights from the old lighthouse flickered like fading stars. His thoughts drifted to his last deployment, the ambush in Syria, the night his team had been pinned for 12 hours, and Shadow had refused to leave his side even after being wounded. They had survived together. But part of Ryan's soul had stayed in that desert. Maybe that was why he couldn't watch another man's dignity be trampled. Not again. As he stood there, wind cutting through the silence, Ryan felt something change within him. He didn't know that the man he defended would soon pull him back into a world he thought he'd left behind, a world of shadows, secrets, and ghosts long buried beneath the waves. Morning broke cold and quiet over Crescent Bay. The fog from the night before still clung to the docks like a secret the ocean refused to release. Inside the administrative wing of the base, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor as Lieutenant Ryan Carter stood at attention outside Colonel Reeves's office. Shadow sat obediently beside him, the dog steady breathing the only sound in the stillness. Ryan's uniform was simple, stripped of any combat insignia. To most, it was a sign of discipline, but to him it felt like a reminder of distance, a separation between who he had been and who he was now. When the door opened, Colonel Reeves motioned him in with a quiet nod. Reeves had commanded multiple deployments during the height of the Persian Gulf conflicts. Age and responsibility had carved a layer of composure into him that no training could teach. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, but Ryan remained standing. "At ease, Lieutenant. You're not under arrest," Reeves said, his tone firm but not unkind. "But you are being formally reprimanded." Ryan nodded once, eyes steady. He didn't speak. There wasn't much to say. Reeves sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You stepped into a situation you shouldn't have. You're lucky Wallace didn't press charges for insubordination. What were you thinking?" Ryan hesitated. "Sir, I wasn't. I just saw something wrong and couldn't look away." Reeves studied him for a moment. "You were a SEAL, Carter. You understand command structure better than anyone. Sometimes silence keeps order." "Sometimes silence buries decency, sir," Ryan replied quietly. For a moment neither spoke. Then Reeves set a paper on the desk. "A disciplinary order. You'll be reassigned to labor detail for the next 10 days. Base maintenance. No weapons, no missions, no privileges. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Dismissed." Ryan saluted and left, Shadow following close. Out in the hall, several sailors gave him cautious looks, half pity, half admiration. News spread quickly on a base, and everyone had heard about the confrontation. To some, he was reckless. To others, he was brave. To Ryan, it didn't matter. The labor yard was quiet that morning. The sun broke through the fog just enough to glint off metal containers stacked like forgotten memories. Ryan was given a task by Sergeant Miller, the logistics supervisor, a heavy-set man with years of service behind him, and the no-nonsense tone of someone who'd seen better soldiers fall apart under lesser pressure. Miller handed him a clipboard. "We don't need heroes out here, Carter. Just get the inventory done. Stay out of trouble." "Yes, Sergeant." The day passed in mechanical rhythm, lifting crates, checking serial numbers, moving supplies. Shadow stayed close, his leash looped loosely around Ryan's wrist. The dog's patience mirrored his own. They had learned endurance together in the desert, when survival meant waiting hours for extraction with no water, no contact, and the sound of distant mortars as lullabies. Here, the silence felt heavier. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of salt and rust. Ryan paused, rubbing his shoulder where the old wound still throbbed. That was when he noticed a figure standing near the far end of the storage line. The man was still, hands tucked in his coat pockets, watching him. It took Ryan a few seconds to recognize Thomas Hale. The old veteran hadn't been seen since the confrontation, and his sudden reappearance felt almost spectral. Ryan approached slowly. "Sir, I didn't expect to see you here." Thomas gave a faint smile. "Neither did I. But old habits die hard. Used to come here back when the bay was busier. Looks the same, smells the same, too. Maybe that's why I never left California." Ryan set down the clipboard. "They reprimanded me. 10 days of labor. Could have been worse." "I heard," Thomas said softly. "You stood up when it counted. Not many still do." "I don't know if it changed anything," Ryan murmured. "Major Wallace's type always land on their feet." Thomas nodded, eyes distant, as if replaying something decades old. "Maybe. But sometimes it's not about changing the world. Sometimes it's just about not letting it change you." Shadow sat between them, head tilted slightly, sensing the quiet bond forming. Thomas crouched briefly, resting a hand near the dog's paw, not touching, but close enough for trust to flow unspoken. "Good soldier," he whispered. "He's got the eyes of one who's seen too much but still wants to believe." Ryan smiled faintly. "He's the better half of this partnership." Thomas straightened, gaze turning toward the horizon. "I'll be leaving the base soon, just passing through." "Where will you go?" "Wherever I'm needed," he said cryptically. "The ocean doesn't ask questions." There was something in his tone that made Ryan's instincts stir, a layer of purpose beneath casual words. Before he could ask more, Thomas stepped back. "Take care of that shoulder and keep your head down. Sometimes the right fights cost more than stripes." Ryan watched as the older man walked away, his figure swallowed by mist near the pier. It was as if he dissolved into the sea air itself. Shadow let out a low whine, ears pricked, as though sensing the significance of the moment. Ryan felt it too, a quiet pull, like a thread connecting past and future. That evening, when he returned to his small quarters near the barracks, he found a sealed envelope slid under his door. There was no name, no insignia, only a single word written across the front in black ink. "Tomorrow." He opened it slowly. Inside was a single folded note bearing coordinates, a location deep within the Nevada desert, and a phrase, "You've been noticed." Ryan stared at it for a long moment, pulse quickening. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and Shadow raised his head from the floor, growling softly as if reading the shift in the air. Ryan folded this paper and slipped it into his jacket. He didn't know what awaited him at those coordinates, but something in his gut told him this was connected to the man he had defended. And though he couldn't explain why, the word "tomorrow" felt less like a warning and more like an invitation back into the world he thought he'd left behind. The Nevada desert stretched endless and hollow under the noon sun, a golden expanse where heat shimmered like liquid glass and silence carried the weight of hidden stories. A single black SUV cut across the dirt road, its tires biting into the dust. Inside sat Lieutenant Ryan Carter, his dog Shadow curled quietly beside him, both watching the horizon where mountains blurred into light. Ryan had followed the coordinates from the mysterious envelope, driven by instinct more than logic. He knew it was reckless, leaving Crescent Bay without orders, but the pull toward that message, toward Thomas Hale, had been stronger than fear of consequence. Something inside told him this was not coincidence. After 3 hours of driving, he saw it, a small weathered airstrip carved into the desert floor. A hangar stood at the far end, faded and silent, guarded by a single figure. As Ryan parked, the man stepped forward, raising a hand in greeting. It was Thomas. The same calm presence, the same air of quiet purpose. But there was something different now. Beneath that simplicity was the command of someone used to leading men through fire. "Glad you came," Thomas said, voice even. "Wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Ryan admitted. "Then I realized I already knew I would." Thomas gave a small smile. "That's the part of you that still listens to instinct. Never lose it. You'll need it where we're going." Inside the hangar, 2 other men waited. The first was Chief Petty Officer Mark Reyes, a communications specialist once stationed in Iraq, now operating under quiet retirement. Years of field work had carved caution into him, but his loyalty to the old ways kept him close to men like Thomas. The second was Captain Elena Brooks, an intelligence officer from Naval Command, transferred after an operation in Eastern Europe had gone wrong. Her voice carried the tone of someone who had seen trust weaponized too often. Thomas wasted no time. You're wondering why you're here. I need someone who can still think like a SEAL, but isn't bound by the politics of command. Someone who can act when the Navy can't afford to admit it's watching. Ryan looked between them. You're talking about an off-record mission. More than that, Elena replied. A containment. A former research team working under contract for the Department of Defense vanished 2 weeks ago in the Black Ridge sector. Their project dealt with classified weapons tracking, satellite-linked tech that could be repurposed for hostile control. If that tech leaves the desert, it won't just be our problem. Thomas laid out satellite photos, blurred shapes of tents and heat signatures buried deep in canyons. They went dark after transmitting one final code, he said quietly. A code that shouldn't exist. I recognized it. Ryan frowned. Recognized? Thomas's eyes met his. It was from an operation we ran in '68. Nightfall. The code belonged to Ghost Team. The room went still. Even Shadow lifted his head as if sensing the shift in gravity. Ryan felt a chill despite the heat. You were Ghost Team. Thomas nodded. 5 men sent behind the Iron Curtain. Only 1 came back. He paused, gaze distant. Me. I buried that name decades ago. But when that code resurfaced, I knew someone had dug up what was meant to stay dead. Reyes added, whoever's using it knows what they're doing. They've hidden the signal so deep the system reads it as weather data. Elena folded her arms. Command doesn't believe it's anything real. That's why we're here instead of a task force. If they're wrong, the cost will be catastrophic. Ryan studied the maps. You need a small unit. Someone who can move quiet. Thomas looked at him. You and Shadow. We'll go together. Ryan hesitated. You're not exactly cleared for field work. I stopped needing clearance when I stopped asking permission, Thomas said with a faint grin. We move tonight. As the sun fell behind the ridgeline, they loaded gear into an old utility truck. The mission felt improvised but precise, each detail measured in silence. Thomas moved with the rhythm of a man who never forgot procedure. Watching him, Ryan realized the old veteran hadn't returned to the field out of nostalgia. He had come back because someone needed to finish what began long ago. They drove under a moonless sky, headlights off, guided only by night vision and the quiet breathing of the desert. Shadow rode between them, alert but calm, as if he understood this was not training but something heavier. Around midnight, they stopped near a ridge and continued on foot. The air grew colder, and the wind carried whispers through the canyons. Thomas crouched near a patch of disturbed sand. Tracks, not human patrols, quads, maybe drones. Ryan scanned through binoculars. Faint lights pulsed far ahead, too rhythmic for campfires. They've got power. Then they've got something to hide, Thomas said. Reyes's voice came through the headset. Reading an interference field around your position. They're jamming comms. If you go in, you're on your own. Copy, Ryan whispered. Thomas's tone dropped low. You've got a decision to make, Lieutenant. You still want to see how deep this goes? Ryan met his gaze. I wouldn't be here otherwise. They moved forward, descending through narrow ravines until they reached a ledge overlooking the valley. Below, a cluster of temporary structures glowed faintly beneath camouflage netting. Guards patrolled in irregular patterns. Thomas tapped Ryan's shoulder, motioning for silence, and pointed toward a steel container half buried in the sand. Stenciled faintly on its side were letters that made Ryan's blood run cold. G5, property of Ghost Unit? He turned to Thomas. "What the hell is this?" Thomas didn't answer. Immediately, his face was a study in stillness, but his eyes betrayed something darker: recognition, fear, maybe guilt. "Something that should have stayed buried," he said finally. "Someone's trying to bring Ghost 5 back to life." A sudden roar echoed through the canyon, a vehicle approaching fast. Flashlights swept the cliffs. Thomas grabbed Ryan's arm. "They know we're here." "Then what now?" "We disappear," Thomas said, voice steady. "And we come back prepared." They retreated into the maze of rock as engines closed in, dust clouds rising behind them. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, miles from the site, Thomas looked up at the sky where satellites moved like distant eyes. "It's starting again," he murmured. "And this time, we're the only ones who know." Dawn bled across the desert horizon, washing the sands in shades of red and gold. The night's chase had ended hours ago, but the weight of what Ryan Carter had seen still pressed heavy on his mind. He and Thomas Hale sat in silence inside an abandoned service outpost, a concrete relic left behind by time and the military alike. Shadow slept beside the doorway, his breathing steady, a silent guardian between the world outside and the fragile quiet within. Thomas leaned forward, studying the dusty map spread across the table. "They know we're alive," he said. "That means they'll move the site soon. We won't get a second chance." Ryan nodded, his voice rough from exhaustion. "We need help, sir. 2 men and a dog can't take on a ghost project alone." Thomas smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. "You think I came unprepared?" He reached into his jacket and tossed a small encrypted drive across the table. "Everything I've found on Ghost 5's resurrection is on there. Command will have to listen now." Hours later, Ryan and Thomas stood before the briefing room in Crescent Bay's intelligence wing. The base felt different now, tense, aware, like it could sense the invisible storm approaching. Waiting inside was Admiral Donovan Pierce, the Pacific Operations Chief, a man known for his unwavering composure and his loyalty to order above all else. Behind him, screens flickered with satellite images and red-lined maps of the Nevada perimeter. "Gentlemen," Pierce said, rising, "you've caused quite a stir. Unauthorized travel, contact with a retired operative, and an alleged black project revival. You'd better have something worth this chaos." Thomas stepped forward, calm as ever. "Admiral, I was Ghost 5. The code they used isn't a coincidence. It's ours. Someone's digging up operations buried under presidential seals." A murmur spread across the room. Pierce stared hard at him. "Ghost 5 was decommissioned before half the people in this building were born." "Maybe," Thomas replied. "But the mission files weren't destroyed. They were locked away. Someone's broken those locks." Ryan inserted the encrypted drive into the central console. Images flashed across the screens, schematics of weaponized AI satellites, unmanned drones coded with early UDT encryption, and an old logo stamped on every file: Project Revenant. Pierce's tone shifted from skepticism to concern. "Where did you find this?" "Buried in a canyon beneath Black Ridge," Ryan answered. "They're rebuilding Ghost 5. Same protocols, different soldiers, and this time they're off the books." Pierce studied him for a long moment before turning to his aide. "Get me clearance from Joint Command and prepare a task unit." His eyes moved back to Ryan. "Lieutenant Carter, as of now, you are reinstated to active field command. You'll lead the strike team." Ryan blinked. stunned. "Sir, I'm not cleared." "You are now," Pierce interrupted. "You found this. You know what's at stake." Thomas gave a small nod of approval. "Welcome back to the fight, son." By dusk, Ryan stood on the tarmac surrounded by a small but elite team. Hand-picked SEALs, some faces familiar, others new. Among them was Corporal Dean Riker, a demolitions expert with a reputation for controlled chaos, and Lieutenant Grace Nguyen, a drone operator who had once saved an entire squad in Afghanistan using nothing but a laptop and nerve. Both regarded Ryan with quiet respect. They had read his file. Thomas watched from the sidelines, a ghost returning to his past. Shadow paced beside Ryan, restless, sensing the tension in the air. Ryan knelt, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "We're going back out there, buddy. No mistakes this time." The German shepherd's eyes gleamed with understanding, an old soldier answering the same call once more. When the transport plane lifted off, Ryan looked across the cabin at his new team. For years, he had operated under the shadow of others' command, following orders without question. Now, he was the one carrying the weight of leadership. The responsibility sat on his shoulders like armor, heavy but familiar. Hours later, the team parachuted into the desert, landing miles from the target site. Night swallowed them as they advanced on foot toward the ridge. Grace's drone hovered silently above, relaying infrared scans. "Multiple heat signatures," she whispered into the comm. 12, maybe more. They're guarding something big." Riker adjusted his pack. "If it's as bad as the briefing, we'll need more than C4. Ryan replied quietly, "We won't blow it up unless we have to. We're here to retrieve data, not erase it." As they neared the canyon floor, they spotted a convoy of unmarked vehicles entering a reinforced hangar carved into the cliffside. The same Project Revenant insignia gleamed faintly on a steel door. Ryan signaled the team to halt. "We wait. Observe their rotation. We move when the shift changes." But before they could, a distant rumble shook the ground. The hangar lights flared, and alarms wailed across the canyon. Grace's voice crackled. "They're scrambling drones, big ones. They know we're here." "Fall back," Ryan barked. The team scattered for cover as drones burst into the sky, their searchlights slicing through the darkness. Shadow darted ahead, circling wide, drawing fire away from the team. Ryan felt his pulse quicken, the same chaos he had lived through in Syria. But now he was responsible for every soul here. From their vantage point, Thomas's voice came through the calm, steady, composed, the tone of a man who'd seen too many battles end the same way. "Carter, listen to me. They're not protecting data. They're protecting someone." Ryan ducked behind a rock, breathing hard. "What do you mean, someone?" There was a pause. Then Thomas spoke again, quieter this time. Ghost 5 wasn't just an operation. It was a replication program, training successors modeled after the original team. Someone out there is trying to create me again. Ryan froze. The realization hit like a blade through his chest. "They're cloning soldiers." "Worse," Thomas said. "They're building perfect soldiers, mind-mapped from the memories of men who shouldn't have survived." The comm went silent for a heartbeat. Then static roared through. "Thomas, come in!" Ryan shouted, but no reply came. He looked toward the ridge where a distant explosion bloomed against the stars. Shadow barked sharply, ears perked toward the horizon. Ryan's heart sank. He didn't know if Thomas had made it out, but one thing was certain, The desert had just awakened something that was never meant to return. The rain came late that night over Crescent Bay, washing the salt and dust from the quiet docks where the sea met steel. Weeks had passed since the operation in the Nevada desert, but to Lieutenant Ryan Carter, time had become something fractured, measured not in hours but in questions left unanswered. The explosion that had swallowed the ridge had taken Thomas Hale with it, or so command's report claimed. Yet Ryan could not shake the feeling that the man who had once been Ghost 5 had not truly vanished. Ghosts didn't die, he thought. They simply changed battlefields. He sat inside the dim-lit debriefing room, the hum of fluorescent light mixing with the soft tapping of Shadow's paws as the dog paced beside him. Across the table, Admiral Pierce studied the after-action report in silence. The operation had been classified as a success. The enemy base destroyed, Project Revenant neutralized, the stolen technology contained. But Ryan knew better. There had been too much precision in the enemy's movements, too much familiarity in their tactics. Someone had been one step ahead the entire time. "You did well, Lieutenant," Pierce finally said, closing the file. "The Navy owes you." Ryan's tone was quiet. "We owe Thomas more." Pierce looked at him for a long moment, then leaned back. "You think he's alive?" "I think if anyone could walk out of that desert, it's him." Pierce exhaled, the kind of weary breath that carried years of buried truths. "Maybe you're right, but even if he is, he doesn't want to be found. Men like him, they stop being soldiers long before the world admits it." Outside, thunder rolled over the sea. Ryan stood, saluted, and left, without another word. He and Shadow walked through the drizzle toward the old marina. The night air was thick with salt and memory. He had promised himself that if Thomas was still out there, he would find him, not as a soldier, but as a student seeking the last lesson his teacher hadn't finished giving. Days turned into a week. The team disbanded, each returning to their stations. Grace Nguyen went back to Drone Command. Dean Riker was reassigned to demolitions in Okinawa. Ryan stayed behind, officially on recovery leave, but in truth, he wasn't resting. Each night he reviewed fragments of drone footage from the mission, the moments before the explosion, the thermal scans. One pattern kept repeating, a faint signal broadcast seconds before the ridge detonated, encrypted under a code only 2 men could know. One of them was dead, and the other was him. It was a coordinate, not in Nevada, not anywhere near it. Crescent Bay. The following evening, he followed the signal to the cliffs above the base, where the sea broke violently against black stone. A cabin stood there, small and unlit. Shadow growled softly but didn't pull back. Ryan's heart tightened. He pushed open the door. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and salt. Maps were pinned to the walls, their corners fluttering in the ocean breeze, sneaking through a broken window. At the center of the room sat Thomas Hale, alive, weathered, but unmistakably real. He turned slowly, a faint smile ghosting his face. "Took you long enough, Carter." Ryan froze, torn between disbelief and relief. "You were supposed to be dead." "I was," Thomas said, "but death's a flexible concept in my line of work." He motioned for Ryan to sit. On the table lay a single file stamped "Classified. Ghost Unit. Termination Records." Thomas's voice carried the weight of finality. "They shut it down, officially anyway. But the people who built Project Revenant weren't after technology. They were after legacy. Mine, yours, everyone who's ever fought, believing the uniform makes the man. They wanted ghosts they could control. Ryan listened, silent. Thomas looked at Shadow, who sat quietly near the door. "He still trusts you. That's rare, Carter. You know why dogs make better soldiers than men? Because they never forget why they fight. They don't get lost in rank or glory." Ryan's throat tightened. "Why tell me this? Why not stay buried?" "Because ghosts can't rest while the living still misunderstand them," Thomas said. "You're not meant to repeat us. You're meant to correct us. Lead not as a shadow, but as yourself." The wind howled through the cabin, shaking the windows. Ryan realized what this meeting truly was. Not a reunion, but a farewell. Thomas reached into his pocket and handed him a small metal tag, tarnished by decades. It read only GF5 J01. "Keep it," Thomas said, "not as a reminder of me, as proof that legends end but duty doesn't." Ryan's voice was rough. "What will you do now?" Thomas smiled faintly. "The same thing I've always done. Disappear." He stood, his movements slow but sure. "You've got your own ghosts to command now. Make them count." When Ryan looked away for a heartbeat, the man was gone. The cabin door swung gently in the wind. Only the sound of waves remained. Shadow whined softly, pressing his head against Ryan's hand. Later that night, back at the docks, Ryan stood beneath the flickering security light, turning the dog tag over in his palm. He looked out toward the endless horizon and felt the storm clouds breaking apart. The world was quieter now, but not at peace. There were still battles to fight, not with weapons, but with remembrance. As dawn broke, Ryan clipped the tag onto his gear and whispered, "Come on, Shadow. We've got work to do." The German shepherd barked once, sharp and clear, the sound echoing across the bay. Far out on the water, a fishing boat moved toward the fog, and for a moment, just for a heartbeat, Ryan thought he saw a familiar figure at the helm, turning once before vanishing into the light. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly, through an old soldier who refuses to surrender, through a loyal dog who still believes, and through a heart that keeps fighting even when no one is watching. In the echo of ghosts, Ryan's journey reminds us that faith is not about never falling. It's about rising again, guided by something greater than orders, medals, or fear. Perhaps that something is God's unseen hand, working through courage, loyalty, and compassion to turn loss into purpose. Like Ryan, each of us walks through our own deserts, battles of doubt, grief, or silence. Yet, just as he found light through the storm, we too can find grace in the smallest signs, a kind word, a faithful friend, a prayer whispered into darkness. That is where God's miracles live, in everyday acts of endurance and love. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments so that others may feel the same hope.